If you're interested in working remote, this video is for you. Hi, my name is Ingashan and I'm the career whisperer, and I have been working remote for the past 5 years. I began working remote way before COVID made working remote cool. Back in 2017, I was a program operations coordinator for a non-profit in Kenya. And as you can imagine just from the title, my role required me to not only report to a physical office every single day, I was also required to report to the field across Kenya. And so I was traveling quite a bit. That meant that I needed to feed in time for the commutes. And so I was spending around 2 hours in traffic every single morning. And then I would spend the entire day in the office. And when it got to 5 p.m., you don't want to leave the office at 5 p.m., right? Because traffic. So either you go to the bar next door, and we didn't really have a bar next door. And so I would just sit in the office and continue working until traffic died down. So I was leaving the office maybe around 7 p.m., maybe later every single day. And at some point, it became tiring. In 2017, I had been doing this for maybe 2 years, and I was just tired. And I wanted to figure out ways where I could get more autonomy, more freedom, more flexibility. And honestly, I was also tired of working right next to my manager every single day. And my new manager at this time had become quite a micromanager. And so I was just exhausted of it and I wanted something different. And so I began researching on all the different ways I could make this new life I wanted happen. And then I landed upon remote work. Back then, remote work was reserved for a very specific segment of employees. It was maybe like, you've worked in this company for 5 years, we now trust you, you can now have the privilege of working from home, but sometimes we'll require you to come into the office. It was still not very, very common to have people working remotely. And so I knew that it's not going to be an easy sell, even to my current employer, for me to work remotely. That time, I hadn't discovered job hopping. And so moving jobs was not even at the forefront of my mind to move into a job that will allow me to work remotely. And so I began looking for opportunities within my company that could allow me to pivot to a role that I could do remotely. And I knew that a few months into 2018, we were going to start hiring a data coordinator in Kenya. And I started positioning myself for that role. I remember when I first told my manager, hey, I think I want to be the data coordinator. She looked at me and said, Ingashan, you're a really high performer, but we have never ever seen you do anything data related. So we don't even have any confidence that you can do this role well. And besides, we are looking for someone who has 5 years experience in data. But I did not let that deter me. My vision for working remotely far superseded my imposter syndrome. And so I spent every single waking weekend studying and learning how to use Excel, how to do analysis, and positioning myself for this position that was coming up. One day I'll tell the story of what happened in the interview process. But I failed 2 times, and then I eventually succeeded, and I was hired as a data coordinator. And because I knew that I had to prove myself in that year, I acquired 2 mentors, 2 Indian American men who were working at the same company, who taught me how to do data. And I just basically approached them and told them, hey, I want to spend 2 hours every week with each one of you, teaching me everything you know about data and analytics. So I never went to school to study data, or I never did any specific course. Luckily, I was learning from some of the best minds in the market, both of whom have gone to do amazing things with their lives. So by the end of the year, I had smashed every single target I was given as a data coordinator. And in this company I was working at, we had operations not just in Kenya, there was also operations in 5 other countries in the world. And in 2019, so the year after, we were meant to scale and expand to 15 countries. So there's this thing I have done in Kenya that no other country has done. And I knew there was going to be a gap in the other countries very, very quickly. And so at the end of the year, I approached the global chief commercial officer and I told him that I am interested in a role that is possibly global because there's going to be a gap that I can be promoted to, And because this role is going to be serving now 15 countries, I was now trying to make a case for me to work remotely. It was actually much easier than I thought because I'd smashed all my targets and they were happy to promote me. But the case to move remote was so much easier than I thought. And so I spent all my career since then working in mostly remote roles. In this video, I'm going to give you a summary of some of the things that could help you land a remote role. Number one, before we get into anything tactical, I have realized that many people do not even know what remote work is. Remote work generally refers to a work arrangement where employees are not required to go into any physical location and can work from anywhere. But there's so many different kinds of companies that take different shapes and forms, and just because of that nuance, remote work also takes different shapes and forms. But here are the four main types of remote work. The first one is the full-time remote worker. This remote worker is just working a normal 8 to 5. So they are just working a full-time job like an in-person would be, but they are able to do all their responsibilities remotely. They attend work meetings, they collaborate with other team members, and typically they're not based in the same city or country as their employer. And so they spend their entire time working remotely. In most situations, the employer has like a defined workstation. So you work remotely from India, for example. The second type of remote work is hybrid. In this arrangement, you work some of your time in a physical location and some of your time in a remote setting. Typically, you negotiate this with your employer, or your employer already has a set standard for what the hybrid environment will look like. The third type of remote work is the virtual or the telecommuting remote work. This is a new crop of remote work. It mostly came up in 2020. And this is the situation where previous roles that could not be done remote now have new technology that enables them to work remote. So for example, the call center agents, they work shifts, and historically, nobody thought that it was possible for call center agents to work remotely. But now we have new technology that enables call center agents to work remotely. Their performance can be tracked. They can be able to measure everything and every single call that they're making or receiving, even though they don't have to come into a physical location. The final one is called digital nomads. This is maybe the holy grail of remote work. These remote workers, they not only work remotely, they move countries quite frequently. So 1 month they're in Bali, the other month they're in Uganda, the other month they're in Kenya. They move countries quite frequently. And as you can imagine, this presents a different set of legal complications with employers. So when employers are hiring people, they want to be able to figure out the legalities around how they will calculate payroll and how they will pay taxes for that employee. And because digital nomads are moving around so much, there's so many different legal processes that you have to go around to be able to have these kinds of employees in your payroll. And some employers enable that. I have worked for an employer that enabled digital nomads, and we had a bunch of digital nomads in our team. But as you can imagine, it's quite complicated, and so many employers don't really enable digital nomads. So now that you've identified the kind of remote work you're interested in, the next organic step is to figure out what are the remote specific roles in your industry. There's a misconception that there are only certain industries that can allow remote work, like software engineering, and others cannot, like medicine or like doctors. However, every single industry has a role that could be done remotely. And the way to think about this is to ask yourself these two questions. Can this role be done from anywhere? The role that you're interested in, or the role you're currently in? The second question is, are there tools that could enable this role to be done anywhere? So many people haven't thought about possibly making that role remote, but there are so many tools out there nowadays that enable most roles to be done remotely. And so you just need to figure out whether those tools exist and how you can embed them into your role. And doctors have done this very well. In the past, you had to go into a physical doctor's office to get an evaluation, to get tested, your blood pressure, your weight, all these things. But now there are tools and technologies that allow doctors to do this fully virtually, and so doctors no longer have to go into a physical office to be able to do their job effectively. So now we know the kind of remote setup we are interested in. We also know from research and from asking ChatGPT and other similar tools, we also know the industry-specific roles that could be done remotely. When you have these two things, the third organic thing to do is to identify what skills you need to be able to enable you to do that remote job effectively. And there's two different buckets for these kinds of skills. The first one is the technical skills. So for example, if you are interested in pivoting into data analysis like I was inside your industry and field, but you don't know how to do analysis, you have to acquire the technical skills that can enable you to unlock that role as a possibility. But there are so many people who already have the technical skills to do their job effectively. And so this second group of skills is actually even more important, and that is the remote specific soft skills. There is a huge misconception that you need the same level of skills to succeed in your in-office environment as you do to succeed in your remote setting. And that could not be far from the truth. When you're in a remote setting, you have to sort of turn up your communication skills a whole notch higher than you had ever imagined. And I go into a lot of details about this remote specific soft skills in my next video. So I would recommend you go and watch that video, but here is a summary of all the remote specific soft skills you need. So now you have identified the kind of remote setting you're interested in, you know the kind of remote roles that exist in your industry, and you have figured out what skills you need to acquire. Now you need to start building your online presence and your network. You see, the thing is, the companies that are looking for remote workers, in most cases, the recruiters are themselves remote workers. And so how are they finding talent? How will they find you? They will go online. They'll search for your LinkedIn profile. They will see what kind of experience you have, background, etc. And so you have to have a LinkedIn profile that recruiters can easily understand who you are, your background, your experience, and make them attracted to you. And you also have to put yourself in positions that you can be referred to those recruiters. This last one is really just changing the way you think about job hunting. You see, what happens is most people, when they're looking for remote work, they go to Google and they type in remote work in Kenya. And then they apply to every job that pops up. The problem is, not every single company that is hiring remote workers or is willing to let people work remotely advertises their roles as remote work roles. And so you want to ensure that you're able to find even those companies that don't advertise their roles as remote roles. And how do you do this? You want to first find the companies you're interested in. And then now you know the remote specific roles in your industry. So you want to find those roles within those companies. And then as you're interviewing, negotiate for those roles to be remote, either full-time or hybrid or whatever format of remote work you want. I teach people how to job hunt the company first way in my one-on-one coaching sessions, but I also have 30 days in my 90-day career challenge workbook that are dedicated to learning how to job hunt this new way. So I'll grab the workbook, link is in my bio. I hope this video makes the journey to a remote role for you much easier. And please subscribe and look out for other videos that I talk about remote work on this channel. Don't forget to check out the workbook in my description. Have a nice day.